Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. This is the first in the four-part series on broadband planning, data, and community engagement. And I'm Gail Hike, the Community Development Outreach Broadband Specialist from UW Extension, and I will serve as your facilitator for the day. I would like to recognize my Extension colleagues who will be working behind the scenes to ensure that our session runs smoothly. Jessica Beckendorf, Community Development Outreach Specialist, and Chris Stark, Digital Equity and Inclusion Specialist. They will be monitoring and the waiting room and will facilitate questions throughout the chat. Through the chat. This webinar is being sponsored by the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension and the Broadband Office with the Public Service Commission. A few housekeeping items before we begin. Today's meeting is being recorded, and the final video, along with PowerPoints from our session, will be posted on the Extension Community Development website. As a friendly reminder, we ask that you please mute your microphones when not speaking. If you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to drop your questions and comments into the chat. You may send a private chat to either myself, Jessica, or Chris at any time during this session. During the past several months, we have heard from local planning committees that they are unsure of what data they need to collect. Folks are wondering how to engage community members in their broadband planning process. And many of you have expressed feeling a bit of survey fatigue. We designed this four-part series to help you address these concerns. During the next 4 weeks, we will be offering online webinars every Monday from noon till 1 p.m. These sessions will offer 30 to 40 minutes of content, followed by an open question and answer period. During the question and answer period, we will welcome questions on that day's topic, as well as any broadband planning questions you may have. Today, we will look at the data your community may have already collected, share sources of public data that can help you with your local broadband planning, and assist you with identifying gaps that you may have and where you still need to collect data. Our speaker today is Matt Curis. Matt is a distinguished community development specialist with the Division of Extension's Community Development Institute. He works in partnership with Extension's statewide network of resources to assist communities and organizations in the areas of regional economic analysis, labor force research, socioeconomic impact analysis, and industry sector competitiveness. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
Great. Thanks so much, Gail. Thank you to everyone that is taking some time out of their day to join us for this webinar. I know that data collection and data analysis, as Gail alluded a bit to, can be a little frustrating for communities and organizations that are engaged in all sorts of community economic development planning, including community broadband planning. So our goal today, as Gail shared, is to share some of the public resources that are available to you for those of you that are going through this process. And we're going to share a lot of different resources today, and I don't want this to be a data dump. I don't want this to be overwhelming. So while this list of data that we will share today is not necessarily exhaustive, I do want you to know that we are available to help answer questions and help you move forward in collecting and analyzing this data as part of your planning processes. And just jumping right in, if we think about what a data checklist might look like for community broadband planning, we decided on 3 different categories today to share information with you regarding, first of all, broadband availability. And I'm sure many of you are available some of the tools that are already out there to look at what levels of broadband may be available in your community or geography of interest, and how to better help organizations that are collecting this information provide accurate information to stakeholders that need it. We'll talk a little bit about covered populations in terms of digital equity. And finally, we'll spend a fair amount of time talking about how data can inform community economic and workforce development efforts related to broadband planning. And first of all, probably a resource that most of you are familiar with is the National Broadband Map. And the National Broadband Map has actually gone through a number of improvements. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination still, but it is an improvement beyond the former National Broadband Map that relied on the FCC Form 477 data. And one of the ways it's done that is to create a fabric of all locations in the United States where fixed broadband internet access is or could be installed within a certain time period. And this has been done by CostQuest, who is a firm that has worked with the FCC. And the fabric is updated on a regular basis, and it can be challenged. So as you use this information and find that you may not have a location in the fabric, you can challenge that with the FCC and hopefully get it updated and added to the map. And this is, again, is updated on a regular basis. Version 2 is out right now, and version 3 will be available to license holders to submit challenges and for ISPs to submit updated data availability, which will then be pushed out to the public in the near future. And part of that, it also reports broadband availability at these fabric locations. So it shows which locations are served or could be served by broadband. And it also allows you to kind of look at geographies of interest as well to get an estimate of how many locations may be served within certain standard geographies and help you better understand who is served and who may not be served in your community. And again, you can challenge this information with the FCC. So if there are locations that do report being served or being reported at certain speeds, this information can be challenged and updated by the FCC. Now, just a quick snapshot of what the broadband map looks like for those of you that may not be familiar with it. It does summarize coverage by states, counties, congressional districts, what are known as census places, tribal areas, and metropolitan statistical areas. Unfortunately, it does not include other geographies of interest that may be maybe being used by many of you in part of your planning processes. Especially including towns and school districts, which are increasingly a geography of interest for community broadband planning. As I noted before, it does allow users to check and challenge availability at a given address. You can filter by different speeds and technologies. And one of the characteristics of the new National Broadband Map is that it summarizes and visualizes data using what's known as the H3 hexagonal grid system. And this was actually developed by engineers at Uber to better help them distribute services. So it is really good for indexing and spatial analysis. It's not so great for visualizations because it does suffer from what's known as the modifiable aerial unit problem. And specifically, it suffers from what is known as scale dependency. So if we simply look at Mellon, Wisconsin, in Ashland County, Mellon is a community we've been working with, and we're also working with the town of Morse. So unfortunately, we cannot get data specific to the town of Morse using this application. If we look at areas that are reporting being served at certain levels using terrestrial technology and using the 1020 definition, we can see certain areas have higher units covered than others. And if we look at one area on the map in the southwest part of Mellon, we can see that it's a pretty high percentage of units covered. However, if we zoom in to that same area, we see a different level of aggregation where we see areas that are not so well covered in that same geography that was shown on the previous slide. And if we zoom in even more, we can see areas, or we can see actually service locations that are being served and not being served. So when you're using this map, it is very scale dependent, and you may have to spend some time actually going into different scales and seeing where coverage is or isn't. Now, one of the things that the Public Service Commission Broadband Office has done is it really improve upon, in my opinion, some of the shortcomings that are found in the National Broadband Map. So it also uses the Federal Communication Commission's broadband data collection. And it also uses the H3 hexagons to display this information, but it also visualizes connectivity summaries by standard geographies. So we can actually go in and look at a standard geography and get the level of coverage in that community. The other great thing about it is it reports the number of service locations that are being served and not being served using different different BEAD standards. So that is a great improvement upon the National Broadband Map as well. Lots of other resources that are available on this website. So it looks at where areas where broadband expansion funding has already been committed. It includes summary map layers from some of the internet speed test resources that are available to users throughout the state. It provides information on individual provider service areas. So as you're planning to perhaps work with different ISPs, you can get a sense of who may be present in the region. You can export maps that you can use in your planning documents. And it also encourages you to look at many of the resources that are available through the PSC Broadband Office, because there are a large number of resources that are really valuable for community broadband planning. Note this is a beta version and they're looking for feedback. So if you do have thoughts to share about this beta application, I would encourage you to contact the Broadband Office. We can also think about data related to the Digital Equity Act. And the Digital Equity Act defined covered populations as those that historically have experienced lower rates of computer and internet use. And the Digital Equity Act defined specific categories of covered populations related to poverty rates, related to aging individuals, involving individuals that may be incarcerated, the veteran population, individuals that may have a disability of some type or language barrier or low levels of literacy, members of racial or ethnic minority groups, and individuals who primarily reside in a rural area. So as you think about your community broadband planning and how that involves digital equity, there are resources out there that have already been published by the Census Bureau and the NTIA that really quantify some of these different covered population groups. That said, they are very specific in terms of how they define these individuals, as well as how they've produced different measures that are not really replicable for a lot of individuals. That said, most of the data do come from the Census Bureau's American Community Survey, which we'll talk more about here in a second. So some of this information can be updated and localized for you if it's not already available through the Census Bureau and NTIA resources. And a couple of the resources that they do have is a population viewer, and you'll see the link there where you can actually go in and look at different levels of covered population in your local community or region. And they also have information on broadband device usage and availability that do come from the Census Bureau. They also have files that can be downloaded with this information quantified at the county and census tract level. Now, again, you may be interested in different geographies for these covered populations that are not available, but there are ways to grab information from the Census Bureau's American Community Survey and Decennial Census that will help you localize and perhaps update this information. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this resource, and both these data sets are available through data.census.gov. And the American Community Survey and Decennial Census include a whole wealth of information on population housing characteristics at all sorts of different geographies, going from the national level down to county, place, census tract, school districts, and other geographies that are available that contain this information. The decennial census data obviously comes from the 10-year census, so 2010, 2020, and so on and so forth. And then the American Community Survey, depending upon the population and size of a geography, either produces 1-year estimates or 5-year estimates. They do include margins of error with the American Community Survey, which may be of interest to some users. For some of you that may be more advanced users, there are APIs that can be used for data extraction that can be really helpful and quick and help you streamline this process. And then for those of you that may not be as familiar with the American Community Survey, Decennial Census, and data.census.gov, there is the Census Academy, which has many training resources and videos and may be very helpful for you in getting up to speed if you're not familiar with these data sets and these resources. Now, for those of you that may want covered population data at different geographies or for different years, here are some resources that you can use to extract that information for your area of interest. So we have poverty level information that comes from the American Community Survey. And what I've done is take the table numbers that might be of greatest interest to you, so you don't have to search through data.census.gov to find the most relevant information. So here we have information for poverty status, and we also have an alternative resource, which is known as the Small Area Income and Poverty Estimates Program, or the SAPE program, which also has poverty data at the state and county level. For those of you that are interested in the aging population, again, American Community Survey and the Decennial Census both have data on age for different geographies and different years. Incarcerated individuals. So again, the American Community Survey has characteristics of what are known as group quarter population, which are also categorized as incarcerated individuals. And then the Decennial Census also has this information as well. The Department of Corrections lists prison populations on their website, as does the Federal Bureau of Prisons. For veterans, American Community Survey Table S2101 has a lot of information on veteran status and demographics of veterans. Individuals with disabilities, Table S1810 has a lot of information again on the types of disabilities people may have, and as well as demographic characteristics of people that may report a disability. The Aging and Disability Resource Centers, or ARDCs, are great resources for working with individuals with disabilities and may help you maybe localize some of that information in your community. And then individuals with a language barrier and individuals with low levels of literacy, there are a couple ACS tables that may be of interest to you, as well as another resource from the National Center of Education Statistics that looks at literacy skills at the county level.
As we advance to the next slide, let me slip in. The question has been asked, will these slides be available by email? And I think that's a yes, but Matt, is that correct?
That is absolutely correct, yes.
Thank you.
And then just a couple other categories of covered populations. Again, through the Decennial Census and the ACS, we have racial and ethnic categories and more detailed information on characteristics of those individuals. The rural population and the rural definition here is a little bit different than the rural definition used by the Digital Equity Act. But again, we do have rural and urban population and households through the Decennial Census. And then population without internet, broadband, or a computer of some sort of connected device. There is information, again, through the American Community Survey on the types of computers and internet subscriptions people may have, as well as the types of internet subscriptions by selected characteristics. And by selected characteristics, we mean by educational attainment, by income level, by race and ethnicity, and so on and so forth. So that was just kind of a quick run through of data related to broadband availability, as well as data related to covered populations for digital equity planning. But the remainder of this presentation talks about how we might consider economic and labor force data in our community broadband planning efforts. And people may wonder why we're putting so much emphasis on this. And in reality, as we'll talk about here in a minute, as broadband becomes increasingly ubiquitous, its availability will become less of a community or regional comparative advantage. And what will really become an advantage is how communities are able to adopt and leverage that information for their use in their community. So as part of that, when we think about looking at this type of information, obviously by looking at economic and labor force data, we can really stimulate discussion about what's happening in our local or regional economy. And I think a big part of that stimulating the discussion is identifying potential partners and stakeholders. There may not be individuals or organizations that really see how broadband adoption or availability will increase the prosperity of individual groups in their community or increase the prosperity of their regional economy. And by sharing this information, we may better tell our story about why this information is important and why it might be useful in broadband planning efforts. A lot of times we want to use this information to affirm or challenge current perceptions about our communities. When we have individuals that may have lived in our community for a long time, they may have pre-held conceptions about what's going on in their community that may or may not be true, or newcomers may have certain perceptions that may or may not be true. And this information can help either affirm or challenge those types of perceptions. We can use it to identify local strengths and weaknesses, and importantly, recognize and prepare for change. And I know change is scary for a lot of communities. Change isn't something we always like, but as broadband becomes increasingly available, there will be changes that occur to our community, and changes that are already happening as a result of how our society is changing and those societal needs that that depend upon broadband. When we look at this information, we are looking for patterns and not a single answer. So we might be looking for a number of different data sets to kind of triangulate what we're seeing in our local community from one measure or another. We're often concerned with trends instead of precision, and especially when we're looking at smaller communities and looking at information such as that contained in the American Community Survey. With the larger margins of error that are associated with that, we may not want to get hung up on decimal points, but instead look at how a given measure may be changing in our community. And then we want to focus on comparing figures rather than ranking them. So we may want to look at how our community compares to state or national averages, or maybe comparable communities, but not necessarily say whether one is better than the other. And again, really, we're taking this information to tell the story about our local economy, and data can help us tell that story. So as I noted before, as broadband becomes increasingly available, communities will not be able to leverage that availability against other communities as a comparative advantage, because if everyone has it and everyone has it at a given speed, it's not going to be something that's sought out based on one location or another, just based on that availability. So as we kind of go through this process, a couple questions I'd like you to kind of think about in the back of your mind, and maybe you can put some of them in the chat that we can talk about at the end, is what type of story do we want to tell about our community using this data? And what types of questions might we want to answer regarding our economy and our labor force? And again, you don't have to put those in right now, but just kind of keep those in the back of your mind. And if you do want to share some thoughts in the chat box, we can talk about those at the end. So similar to the covered population data, the Census Bureau and NTIA also has a dashboard that looks at all sorts of economic indicators. And the intent of this dashboard is for policymakers and the public to assess how changes in broadband availability and adoption could influence local economies. So again, that is something that we're trying to do with data and help tell the story about how broadband availability and access will improve or change our local economies. And there are indicators that are available through this dashboard that we'll talk about other resources to access them here in a minute. But employment, small business establishments, poverty levels, home values, educational attainment, and so on and so forth. And again, this information is available through the map viewer, the screenshot you see there, as well as data tables that, again, are available at the county and tract level, depending upon the given measure. So what other resources are available to us to talk about and understand our community economies or regional economies? One of them that you may be familiar with is the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which includes all sorts of information related to employment by industry, wage rates, establishments, unemployment statistics, occupations. Occupations we'll talk a little bit more about here in a second. And all sorts of other state and national data regarding indices such as mass layoffs, productivity, alternative measures of employment, and so on and so forth. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics is one that I use a lot, especially when I'm looking at information outside of the state of Wisconsin. But if you're in the state of Wisconsin, the Job Center Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development also has this information localized for the state. So a lot of the data that you will find on the Bureau of Labor Statistics website is also available through our local Wisconsin website as well. And again, some of the very same data sets that you'll find at the national level, you will find here on this website. So if you're just interested in Wisconsin, you may want to save yourself some time and just come to this resource. And just some simple ways that we may want to look at our economy include what are some of the employment levels in different industry sectors. So just an example from Taylor County, Wisconsin, looking at the share of employment that's found in different industries and comparing it to the state levels to see where we might be similar, where we might be different. And when we think about this for broadband planning, one of the things we may want to think about is, okay, we have a very strong presence in manufacturing. How can we better leverage broadband adoption and availability to help the manufacturing sector become more competitive? We see a high reliance on healthcare and social assistance. What that might mean for telemedicine. We see some other industries where we have a low share of employment relative to the state average. So if we're thinking about maybe opportunities to kind of diversify our economy, we can maybe look at some of those that rely heavily on broadband, like professional and business services, as well as finance and insurance or information. Are there opportunities to help grow those sectors based on better broadband availability and adoption in our community? Another great resource available through Wisconsin is the Data Axle data set, which includes information on individual establishments by county. So it includes just a screenshot from Chippewa County looking at the construction industry, a list of different businesses that are located there, the employment size range they may be, as well as where their address may be within Chippewa County. And again, this is available at the county level for all sorts of different industries throughout the state of Wisconsin. Another resource that's very similar to some of the data that's found in the BLS website, as well as the Wisconsin website, is the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And I don't want to say it's redundant, it's a bit different, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it just because we kind of covered some of these measures already. That said, it does include some different measures that are not found in the previous data resources, such as gross domestic product at the county level, as well as data on proprietors, so the number of business owners, and farm employment, which is hard to find in some of the other data sets due to the way the data are collected for employment. Those of you that may be interested in knowing more about business owners and small business owners, especially in communities, there are some other data sources that are out there. So if you're just trying to get an idea of the number of individuals or households that have self-employment income, that can be done at different geographies using the American Community Survey. The U.S. Census Bureau has business formation statistics. So on an annual basis, they report the number of new business applications on a county level and more detailed information at the state level. There are what are called non-employer statistics from the U.S. Census Bureau. So these are individuals that own a business but do not employ another individual. So they are a sole proprietor, as well as the annual business survey and non-employment statistics by demographics, which gives information on business ownership for race and ethnicity, for veteran status, by gender, and a variety of other characteristics if that is of interest to you. Just a quick example of non-employer statistics just pulled from Lincoln County. And here you can see the number of non-employers in different industry categories. We can see their average revenues. So we kind of get a sense of where these individuals may be concentrated by industry sector, and we kind of get a sense of their magnitude within the community. So again, if we're thinking about how we can use broadband to help these communities become perhaps bigger if they want to grow, to help them better be productive, there are ways that we can look at different industry sectors that may be more prevalent in our community and think about how we may want to do outreach to them. We also want to think about how we can use workforce data to inform all sorts of other strategies that are related to broadband community planning. And other strategies we may want to think about are things like talent attraction, retention, how we develop career pathways, how we think about automation and computerization, how that may be needed by some of our businesses in our community, think about what it might mean for housing development, and a lot of other ways that workforce data might inform strategies that we're thinking about in our communities. A lot of different measures that we can pull. We're not going to go through all of these right now, but the American Community Survey, as well as some of the other data sets that I'll show you here in a second, have a large amount of information related to each of these measures. So let's just think a little bit about planning for workforce in our community, and especially planning in terms of how we build the digital skills and the construction that we need to go forward in developing broadband infrastructure. So just an example of occupation data I pulled from the Green Bay metro area from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And I just highlighted, it switched, the circle should be one lower, which is over telecommunication line installers and repairs. So it might be one occupational category of interest. It reports the number of individuals that are engaged in that occupation in the metropolitan area. It has hourly rates, annual rates for wages. It reports how concentrated they are. And if you click on the link for that, it also provides more information on what that occupation looks like nationally and how it may compare to characteristics in the local Green Bay area. We can also dig a little bit more into occupations as well as skills that may be needed by people that are helping us build our digital workforce. So one great resource for this that some of you may or may not be familiar with is called the Occupational Information Network, or ONET. And the link there is on the screen. And if we simply search for, as an example, telecommunication occupations in the ONET database, we get all these categories returned to us in terms of telecommunication engineering specialists, telecommunication line installers and repairers, telecommunication equipment installers and repairers except line installers, radio and cellular and tower equipment installers and repairers, and so on and so forth. And if we just simply click on one of those, and for this example, just using telecommunications equipment installers and repairers except line installers, and click on the contents button, for that occupation, we can see the types of tasks that are involved typically in that occupation, the types of technology skills and tools that are used, the types of knowledge and education requirements that may be involved, what the number of job openings look like, what wages employment look like, and so on and so forth. So we can get pretty detailed information about the types of skills and education needed by these individuals that we may want to try and build in our community if that is an occupation of interest to help build our digital workforce. Another one that is really useful for looking at characteristics of employment in our community is the local employment dynamics data set, or the quarterly workforce indicators category within that data set from the Census Bureau. And this provides, again, a lot of employment information and by industry, by earnings, and so on and so forth at the county, state, and metro level. And one of the things that I think is really useful for this data set is that it allows us to break down employment within those industries by different demographic categories. So for instance, just some data that we pulled from the Madison region for the share of individuals in each industry sector that are age 55 or older, so perhaps approaching retirement. And we may want to think about, okay, for those industries that are above average or maybe increasing in retirement or pre-retirement age individuals, how can we better use broadband availability and adoption to address some of those retirements that may be coming? Or if we see those that are perhaps a bit lower, are there opportunities to help build that workforce going forward through younger populations? And one way to think about that is maybe the share of individuals that are age 24 or under by industry sector. So opportunities for internships and apprenticeships. And we also may want to think about, if we're below average in some of these categories for younger workers, are there ways to help get them involved in a given industry sector to help replace some of those retirees that may be coming? And again, how can we use broadband availability and adoption to perhaps entice more individuals into these industries? And in some instances like construction, if that is a category we're going to really depend upon for broadband installation, how do we get younger workers involved? Also, individuals in terms of employment by employees of color. So maybe we're thinking about how we can better do outreach to one category of the covered population to help get them better employed in certain industries. So again, we see in the Madison region, construction being a much lower share of individuals that identify as an individual of color in the construction industry. So are there opportunities to help get that percentage closer to parity? If we're thinking about maybe promoting our community as a place to work remotely, we may want to think about the types of occupations that can be done from home. And this is some work out of the University of Chicago that kind of explains the share of occupations that could be done from home in given categories. But we may want to think about, okay, so we know that these are occupations that have a high probability of being able to work from home. Where are these individuals located? So we may want to do some searches throughout the country to think about, if we're going to try and market our community as a place to work remotely, these are the places we want to think about marketing it to. We also may want to think about housing characteristics, and one that I think is important for a lot of different communities in Wisconsin are seasonal recreational housing units. So again, if you're trying to help people understand what the market might be, and you're simply relying on your year-round population, in many Wisconsin counties, you're missing a large number of individuals that may be in a community in a given point of year. And also, if you're looking at the broadband fabric and you're not asking individuals that may have a second home to look at availability at their property and perhaps do a challenge, maybe you're missing an opportunity to better understand internet access and broadband access in your community. So in some communities that have a high share of individuals or a high share of housing units, that are designated as seasonal recreational, maybe in the property tax bills in a given year, you want to drop a note and say, you know, if you haven't already done so, please go on to the National Broadband Map and see if your location is being reported as served or not. And if not, please do a challenge for that location. Just wrapping up quickly, just a couple other data sets that are out there that I'm not going to spend some time going into, but you may find useful. One of those is what's called On the Map. And what this does is help you look at commuting patterns for your community. So where individuals may work that live in your community, or where individuals may live that do work in your community. And these are again separated by different age or earning industry groups. The Department of Administration Demographic Services Center has population estimates annual basis for state, county, and municipalities within the state. And they also have population projections for a variety of different demographic characteristics, as well as some tools that help you visualize population change in your community. And finally, the Wisconsin Department of Revenue has a lot of different visualizations, reports related to many of the measures we talked about before related to employment or labor force, industry concentration, so on and so forth. But they also have visualizations and reports related to sales tax collection by industries, to exports, as well as measures related to local government finance that you may find useful in your planning efforts as well. And finally, that was a lot to go through, and I appreciate you all taking the time to do this. And I know that you'll have questions going forward, especially as maybe you start diving into some of these data sets. My contact information is there, and I am happy to answer any questions that you do have going forward, either today or in the months that are coming. And with that, Gail, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Always a wealth of information. Before we take questions, I just want to remind everyone that the recording from today will be posted on our website. So you'll be able to access all of the links that Matt shared with us. And Matt will also be available at our regional workshops coming up, where he'll do a little deeper delve into telling your economics and workforce story. So thank you for that. I also want to remind all of you that we will be having workshops every Monday for the rest of the month. Next week on August 14th, our speaker will be Sarah Schlesser from UW Extension, Organization and Leadership Development and Outreach Program Manager, who provide tools for helping communities prioritize and focus their community engagement. I welcome all of you now to stay online for the next 25 minutes or so, and we will take questions. And I think, Chris, would you like my video is starting to glitch out. So maybe Chris, you can help facilitate some of those questions.
I will indeed. And the first question here in the chat was placed by Cliff Albertson. Cliff, delighted to know you're online. Hello today. And really, it doesn't deal directly with broadband, but the gist of this question gets to what percentage of our grads stay in Wisconsin. So I'll read the question for you, Matt, and Cliff, if you want to chime in, you're welcome to. But what percentage of technical college students stay and work in Wisconsin? And Cliff, maybe I'll change that to what percentage of technical college graduates perhaps stay and work in Wisconsin? And then the same question for other college and university students. Matt, you're pretty good with data. I don't know if you have that one off the top of your head or not there.
I don't know the number off the top of my head. I'm sure the technical college system has statistics on student retention. As far as other college and university students, I can't speak to the private institutions in the state, but I know for the UW system, it depends upon the actual campus. So for instance, UW-Madison has a higher share of individuals that leave the state after graduation. But for many other four-year institutions, a very high share of them do remain in the state after graduation. And there are specific statistics available from the system that we can provide you.
All right, this is Cliff. We plan to have an outreach in this area to the colleges and universities, and to introduce to their students that are interested, touring maybe a telephone museum and learning about the tremendous infrastructure we have in broadband, and encouraging them as they consider their life work to stay in Wisconsin. You can get a job anywhere in the world and still stay in the great state of Wisconsin. So I was just curious about that. I think that has some legs, and I think that there's other types of attractions that we can do regionally to work with students to give them a better understanding of all the resources that we have here. So thanks for taking a look at the question.
Okay, Cliff, that's good to hear from you, and we hope to see you soon online. Jessica, do we want to address the question that Melanie has asked about a list of the regional workshops, dates, location, and times? Do we want to visit those right now?
Sure, I can take those.
Okay.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I was just looking for them so that I could copy and paste it, but why don't you go ahead and tell them?
The first one will be September 6th and 7th, and we will be at Northwood Technical College in Rice Lake. The second one, September 28th and 29th, will be in Toma at Cranberry Country Lodge. The third one is October 9th and 10th, and we'll be at the Radisson Hotel and Conference Center in Fond du Lac. And the final one for this year will be October 25th and 26th at Nicolet College in Rhinelander.
Thank you, Gail. And I see that Greg Milayevich has posted something in for the Wisconsin Technical College Systems webpage when we have time to look at that. So thank you for that, Greg. I think on the question to answer Michelle's question, the workshops, the closest to Madison that we will be, Gail, I don't know the difference from Toma, and then Fond du Lac on October 9th and 10th, Michelle.
Right, and we will be doing a second set of regional workshops next spring as well. And so we will move them around. We promised that we would get 4 in this year and 4 in early next year. So if those dates don't work for you, please stay tuned, and hopefully we will be closer to your neighborhood in 2024.
And then Tess Carr has a very good question. Will the workshops focus on using the databases we reviewed during this webinar? Trying to envision the best personnel to invite benefit from them. Prompting a discussion there.
Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Sure. That will certainly be part of the workshops. So we talk a little bit more about, I think, really telling your story using this data. So depending upon the workshop, we will spend a little bit of time going into this data a little bit more on a localized fashion to give some further examples of how this might inform community broadband planning efforts. So depending upon, the given community and what the issues may be in that community, it may differ for different communities in terms of who they invite. But certainly, a lot of the information that we're talking about will be pertinent to community economic and workforce development organizations, as well as perhaps some individual business owners.
We have any other questions?
One thing I could do, if it would be helpful, is we do have a draft agenda. It's still being worked on, but we have a lot of things in place. Would you guys like me to share my screen and kind of just run through what we're thinking so far? I don't know if it's too premature, but we do have a lot of things in place. So I'll do that really quick so that if it helps any of you kind of identify staff. So we're going to kind of kick off with Mark O'Connell talking about the role of local government in broadband. Then we're going to have an update from the Wisconsin Broadband Office staff, as well as Carol Cook from NTIA, where we'll be talking about the broadband timeline for BEAD and digital equity. Then Matt's going to run a session on telling your economic story with data. So there will be, as he said, some focus on that. We have Northwood Technical College that will be talking a little bit about some of their offerings on workforce development and broadband. Kristen with our office will be talking about the push-pull factors that affect broadband. Then we will have a pretty long workshop on developing public-private partnerships. So how to find the private partners, questions you might want to ask of them, how to kind of get to that hopefully win-win partnership, and the roles and responsibilities related to that. So you'll have plenty of time there also to kind of think through what that means for your communities. And then on day 2, we'll share a little bit about the broadband toolkit that we'll be launching in late August. And then you'll go through a workshop on different financing options for broadband. And then the majority of the rest of the time is, there's another workshop also, or a talk on legal considerations that we're planning in the works. That's in the works right now. But the big portion of that day is going to be actual public-private partnership conversations where we will do our best to match you up with internet service providers who are in attendance. So did I miss anything, Gail or Chris, that you want to add?
No, I think you've got.
I think we're good on that. I see Barb from New North had a question about sharing a link to the dates, registration info for the regional workshops, and we will indeed get to that, Barb. I don't know if we're quite ready to do that yet, Jessica. Maybe not right at the moment, but but that will be forthcoming. Huh?
We're working with a vendor to get a registration site set up, and that will hopefully be very, 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 very soon. And I'm making note of whoever is mentioning that they'd be willing to share. I'm going to make note of your name and reach out to you directly once we have the site available.
Okay, and then Michelle asks, how has attendance been in the past for these kind of events? It's It's been, frankly, pretty well attended, Michelle. I don't know if I have numbers off the top of my head. Gail or Jessica, do you have numbers for?
For our face-to-face multi-day workshops, broadband workshops, we in the past have ranged anywhere from 50 to 140 people. So we're hoping to have at least 75 folks at each of our workshops.
Thank you. Okay. Well, we hope to see you at one of them, Michelle, that's for sure, whether it's in your case, Fond du Lac or Toma, but that'd be great. Or also the winter ones, which will also be based on what we've learned from the first round of workshops and everything. Any other questions, please?
I think we can give you guys some of your day back.
Well, we do certainly thank everybody for being in attendance, and we hope that you'll jump on next week on the 14th. Gail, final comments or?
Yep. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Matt, for joining us today. If you have questions, don't hesitate to contact us and watch for the message that the program and recording is on our website. And we hope that you will all register for our sessions coming up every Monday in August, as well as our regional workshops, where the posting for that should be coming hopefully very soon.